You're live, you can start.
Okay. Welcome everyone to the second masterclass for the project which examines the proposal of the introduction of blockchain technology in Indian elections. Before I get started with introducing a few more details about the project, a few housekeeping notes. This talk is being streamed on YouTube. If you are on Zoom, we would encourage you to put your mics on mute unless you're speaking. And when if you want to ask a question, you can unmute that. If you have a question, but you don't want to speak out because of noisy environment or you just prefer not to, you can paste it in the Zoom chat and we'll pick it up and read it out loud for you. If you want to interject or queue up a comment, remark, or a question, you can use the raise hand feature in Zoom. In most Zoom builds, it is under the reactions tab. But in some, depending on your operating system, it might be under the participants tab. So I'm not sure what you're using, but check in both places and you should be able to figure that one out. If not, just ask in the chat and we'll pick it up and we'll help you through that. For those who are joining us on YouTube, you can use the YouTube chat function to ask questions and we will relay them back to the Zoom channel. And our moderator and host and our speakers will deal with that. So with that, this project is hosted by Karana, which is a collection of independent critiques of various aspects of digital India. My name is Shankarshan. I'm a member of Karana, and I'm the curator and promoter of this project. The project is also supported by Hasgeek.com. For most on this session, Hasgeek is very familiar, but just in case you do not know or you're not familiar with Hasgeek.com, it's a platform for collaborations across practices surrounding technology, design, law, policy, systems, data, and all sorts of things. The collaborations are through user-generated content that are shared by practitioners and experts. This leads to discovery and elevation of ideas. Hasgeek.com and Hasgeek Media Division provide the underlying infrastructure, tools, services to facilitate these collaborations. The reason we are having all these masterclasses to enable all the participants to acquire some foundational knowledge and perspectives which are required to evaluate the intended and unintended consequences of technology interventions. And we hope to achieve this through a diverse set of perspectives, which focus on identity, equity, privacy, security, rights, agency, and the socio-economic impact of such proposals. I'm absolutely stoked to introduce today's moderator because Smari has been at the forefront of some of the things we're going to talk about. He is a politician, a software developer, an innovator, and an information activist, known for his work relating to direct democracy, transparency, and privacy. Smari is a member of the Icelandic Parliament since 2016. He chairs the Future Committee and the European Free Trade Association Parliamentary Committee. He is a regular speaker on topics like direct or electronic democracy, press freedoms, critique of industrialization as a centralizing force, and a culture of the internet. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Smari McCarthy, and all yours. Take it away.
Thank you, Sankarshan. It's an honor to be moderating this event, where we're going to try to dive a little bit into the various topics of electronic voting, psephology, technological mechanisms for supporting democracy. I hope everybody can hear me okay. But there's, of course, been a lot of discussion about whether, how, and to which degree these technologies should be employed in our democracies. And on the one side, many people see the potential to expand democratic participation and make conducting elections cheaper and more secure and offering more nuanced possibilities for participation. For example, here in Reykjavik, Iceland, the public have for many years been able to participate in collaborative project selection and budgeting to improve their neighborhoods. But on the other hand, many have criticized using these technological methods for lack of transparency, for complexity, for the need for expertise, and in many cases, elitism, as well as showing many ways in which these technologies can be tricked and abused, opening up a number of very valid questions about the integrity of elections. So to lead us through this complicated topic today, we have a presentation from Professor Subhashis Bannerjee. Professor Bannerjee teaches at the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at the Indian Institute of Technology in Delhi. He has been deeply involved in writing, educating, and commenting on the intersection of technology, society, and politics. And his recent work includes commenting on a range of topics such as Aadhaar, contact tracing applications, as well as electronic voting. And I've had the pleasure of reading a little bit of his writing recently, so it'll be very interesting for me to hear his presentation. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Professor Bannerjee, and then afterwards we'll take questions and comments and hopefully get a lively discussion. So Professor, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Marty. So am I clearly audible, everybody? Right. So thanks Hasgeek for inviting me. So let me share the screen and share desktop in case I. Okay, so so I'll talk on electronic voting today, and amazingly, the last year, the whole year of COVID, I've been involved with electronic voting because of this, my participation in the Citizens Commission of Election. So this was formed just before the pandemic started, around March 2020, by Mr. Devasayam, who is an ex-army man, retired as a secretary to the government of Haryana, and one of the ardent anti-electronic voting activists that you can come across. So he got us together. His original thought was to have a public tribunal of sorts, which was not possible because of the pandemic. But we got a whole lot of depositions from people, and we came up with 2 volumes. The first volume, which is what I'll try to cover today, is about the EVM and the VVPAT and their compliance with democratic principles. The second volume probably is more interesting, which I will not cover today, has chapters on electoral rolls. That one is by Harsh Mandar and V. Ramani. Money, Power and Criminalization by Anjali Bharadwaj. Model Code of Conduct by Professor Jagdeep Chokar. Role of Media by Paranjay Gohatakurta, and Role of ECI by Professor Sanjay Gupta. So it took a lot of work to get the 2 volumes out, and probably tens of hours of Zoom discussion getting into midnight. And I'll try to cover some of that today. So what I'll cover is based on depositions by these ladies and gentlemen. So so I'll pass on the slides, and the depositions are linked from the slide. So the notable part is there are 2 notable points. One is that ECI did not depose, the Election Commission of India or their technical expert committee. There was no response forthcoming from them, despite several reminders. And second is that all these ladies and gentlemen in the second part of the thing, they readily agreed to depose, but no deposition was forthcoming from them either, despite repeated reminder. So my erstwhile colleague Purvi Vora volunteered to get in touch with them over phone, email, and she gathered thoughts from everybody, compiled into a massive report, and got them to sign off, right? So each of them, so this is a combined deposition by all these people, and some of them are pretty well known. I think they represent the electronic voting community, computer science voting community worldwide. There are several others who did not respond to the deposition request. So why electronic voting at all? When we talk to a lot of people, they thought that it's primarily for efficiency, but computer scientists and Election Commission of India, they believe that it is more because of correctness. Actually, the people in the commission, they have conducted large elections, and they think that manual counting of paper ballots is not that difficult, even in India. Right? Can be done in a day or 2, fairly easily. But as I was telling Smari, I grew up in Bengal, where it is in the ballot stuffing, by by using dandas is an industry, and I think young Indians may not know it, may not have seen it the way I have. And it is generally believed in this country that electronic voting has prevented some of that. So it has been successful to prevent some of that. And overall, I think that we found that people think that electronic voting has helped. However, this correctness we found is very ambiguously defined. What is correctness of voting? And that concept, both in the minds of electorate, in the minds of ECI, and in the minds of the designers of the system, are not correct. And that is something that we will try to address in this talk a little bit today. So when you talk about correctness of an election, the public trust in elections come from verifiability, right? And that how verifiable is the election outcome. And verifiability traditionally has this connotation that it is administrative verifiability. It is verified administratively. So it is the Election Commission of India which on behalf of all of us verifies the correctness of the election. And it's a very complex process that starts with certification of equipment, equipment manufactured by BEL and ECIL, and they're tested and certified, audited. Then there is a trustworthiness of custody chain. There's a process that defines the trustworthiness of custody chain of election equipment from the time of manufacturing to the time of deployment. It's a 3-stage randomization process by which the voting equipment reaches the polling booth. And then post-election, they are collected, they're sealed, and the polling agents sign them off, and they are put in GPS tracked boxes to strong rooms. So this is a custody chain of a very complex custody chain of processes. There is a trustworthiness of custody chain of VVPAT. VVPAT are the voter verified paper audit trail. So this is a paper audit trail thing that every vote that is cast is also recorded in paper. And this was introduced in India from 2014 parliamentary election, but the 2019 election, every vote had a VVPAT step. And the trustworthiness of the correct custody chain of VVPAT is also defined through a very complex process. And finally, there is a VVPAT-based audit of electronic counts. So this is what is called administrative verifiability. The general public, like, for example, I, do not have too much of a role in it. We have to put our trust on the Election Commission of India, or the officers who are conducting the polls for the verifiability, and we have to trust their words. So this process can work. This is the way it works in most countries, not only in India. But there are several lacunae in our processes that I'll try to bring up, right, that we found out that I'll try to bring up. Now, there can be much stronger verifiability that is possible by using computer science. If you use computer science has looked at electronic voting, has a rich history of studying electronic voting for over 40 years. And you can give mathematical guarantees that every vote is cast as intended, is recorded as cast. Recorded at cast means that you can show that it is recorded correctly just before you start counting. And counted as recorded. So you can give a proof to every individual as a theorem that all these guarantees are met and there are no spurious vote injections. So this is possible. Rare to use though, and the reason is that this will require you to use some non-trivial cryptography. And whether it is proper to use cryptography in large public elections when the electorate has no understanding of it, there are some ethical questions there, right? So, which also I'll cover a little bit out there. So, so publicly verifiable elections, to the best of my knowledge, are not common anywhere in the world. They've been tried in the United States and a few places like Estonia, but only as pilots, and there are no large-scale deployments. So we have to rely on administrative verifiability primarily for correctness of elections. Then there is this notion of internet voting. Whether you can do voting on the internet at all. This is also particularly relevant for India because 30% of the Indian electorate About 200 million people are migrants. They're not at home when voting happens. And traditionally, over the last 70, 75 years, they have not voted. People who have traveled, working laborers, a small number of non-resident Indians who are abroad. So about 200 million people do not get to vote, and that's an incredible statistics. And there must be a way to technologically or otherwise to enable them to vote clearly. And lots of people are thinking of internet voting. Internet voting in computer science is the current consensus is that it's almost impossible because of two problems. I think Ornette in the last talk alluded to the second one, that it's impossible to make it coercion free. I think she said that women in the family are coerced by the men in the family to cast vote in certain ways. So if you want to vote for other party and your husband thinks that you should vote for another party, that becomes difficult for women. So it is impossible to make it coercion free, especially in somebody's home. Even if we can discount the neighborhood gunda telling you that please share your screen before I vote, before you vote and show you who you're voting to. Even between husband and wife, making it coercion free is a little bit tricky. So polling booth is probably the only option. There is also this extremely hard problem of that Rivers pointed out, called the secure platform problem, that you may own a laptop or you may own a mobile phone, but very few people really understand how they work. Right? So they don't control the operating system or the hardware, or have very little understanding of the operating system or the hardware. So to trust an Apple to do encryption for you correctly or do execute cryptographic functions correctly for you or not leak your vote to others is a concern. And Rivers says that we cannot have democracies being controlled by Apples and Googles of the world. So there is a concern, and there is no known method to, actually that's not true. There has been a lot of research on both the secure platform problem and on the coercion-free problem to enable internet voting and computer science. But those techniques are extremely geeky. Most computer scientists will find those protocols hard to execute from home. So they're not practical. So there are theoretical systems that can demonstrate that both these problems can be solved using cryptography of very complex kind, but they're not very popular. They're not very easy to deploy, to use. So the current state of affairs is almost impossible. And there is a joint report of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine that came out in 2018. It's a 200-page report. And that recommended that the US presidential election of 2020 be conducted in polling booths. There should be strictly polling booth protocol. There should be no internet involved. And there can be electronic voting, but they should always be accompanied by human readable paper ballots for audit. Right? So that was a nutshell recommendation of the committee. And many of my computer scientist friends tell me that the US elections, the last US elections, got saved only because of this report and its recommendation, which was followed by most of the states in the United States of America. Okay, so let's first consider why the US National Academies made such a recommendation. And let's consider an EVM only solution, an EVM being an electronic voting machine, right? So no VVPAT, no voter verified paper audit trail. You go press a button and your vote is recorded, right? Now, of course, a voter cannot see what has been recorded. So you press 2 and you have to trust the machine that it is recorded to and not recorded 3, right? So this proof is impossible. So there is no way to resolve a dispute. So what transpires between a machine and a man in the privacy of a polling booth without a witness, and if there's a dispute in that, there's no way to resolve it clearly. Even if there are two human beings who have agreed upon something, agreed upon a number in private, and they come out and raise a dispute, there is no way to resolve that either, right? there's no way to figure out who is lying. But then there are traditional methods like swords and pistols and fist fights, but you can't even bash up a machine. So right, so this dispute resolution is theoretically impossible in an EVM only solution. There's no way to resolve that. Whether the man is lying or the machine is lying is will forever be a mystery. So there is this classical paper by Rebecca Mercurian, actually a PhD thesis from 1992, where she showed that a machine as complicated as an EVM, which means that it has a memory, it has got few registers, it records the vote in an EEPROM kind of a device, and it has push buttons. So a system as complicated as that uh, cannot be proved to be correct. Proving it correct is at least NP hard, may even be undecidable. That's what she proved a theorem out there, that nobody can ever prove that with bounded resources that an EVM is correct. So that's not possible. So that's an impossibility result. So if you cannot ever prove that it is correct, there is no way to predict that whether it will ever reach. It has an EVM will have can be in a million of states, right? So whether any of these states will violate democratic principles or not is something that is impossible to ascertain. So whether an EVM can be hacked or not is actually an irrelevant question. It's irrelevant because that question can never be answered. If it's hacked, it is hacked. If it is not hacked, then you don't know whether it can be hacked or not. So that's not the way to look at the problem. So that an EVM has not been hacked is no guarantee that it cannot be hacked, right? So, and also testing, right? Our Election Commission of India seems to be saying that the EVM is safe because they have tested it adequately. You can only test for malfunction. You cannot test for a hidden Trojan. That's known to be an impossible problem in computer science. So testing does not constitute a proof, right? So you can test and detect that the display is not working or some button is not working, but what is hidden inside a machine cannot be found out by testing. You cannot conduct infinite number of tests potentially, and the state space is infinite, exponentially large. So you cannot ever test for all possibilities, right? And to say that an EVM is not networked is a extraordinarily naive statement, because there can be no machine that is cut off from the environment. So it is constantly interacting to the environment, if not through Wi-Fi, but through sound, heat, and other electromagnetic waves, right? So there can be communication channels that are open that are not obvious, like Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or so on and so forth. So there may be triggers like with the sound. There can be triggers with infrared. There can be triggers with an ultrasound from outside the booth. There can be all kinds of triggers. There can be all kinds of antennas hidden, and a hack system can be easily made to behave correctly under test conditions. So and it cannot be detected by testing. So none of these one-time programmability, quality assurance, etc., they do not lead to verifiability, right? So that line of argument is a false line of argument. So you cannot ever satisfy a voter with an EVM that these guarantees of an election can be met by any EVM design, whether it is by ECI or anybody else. So there is a great deal of problem with the nature of discourse about EVM hacking in India. So the onus is on the Election Commission of India to demonstrate correctness, right? Not on the general public to show that it can be hacked. So there is this public invitation to come and hack, hackathon and so on and so forth. These are like a little bit like theater of the absurd. These things don't make any sense at all, right? So there has to be robust system to demonstrate that in spite of the EVM, the election outcome is correct, right? And this need not be a mathematical proof using cryptography, but it should be the due diligence should be such that there is public trust of it. Ultimately, that's the conventional wisdom. So the legal examination of this issue was by the German Constitutional Court, I think around 2009, and it gave the following ruling. It said that the use of voting machines that electronically record votes meet constitutional requirements only if the results can be examined reliably without any specialist knowledge of the subject. So, some IIT professors declaring it safe will be unconstitutional, or some election commission experts saying that I declare that the EVM is safe does not meet constitutional provisions. And this was a ruling of the German Constitutional Court. There was a friend of mine called Professor Kurt Melhorn, a computer scientist of some repute. He deposed before this court in favor of electronic voting and got overruled by the court. So I have interesting conversations with him about the German Constitutional Court's ruling. The court, however, said that the legislature is not prevented from using electronic voting machines in elections, provided the votes are recorded in some other way beside electronic usage. So this ruling is not applicable on other jurisdictions, but somehow this is respected by most jurisdictions in Europe. So this ruling has led to Holland, England, Ireland, France moving away from electronic voting and to paper-based voting. Iceland, I was discussing with Mari, always had probably paper-based voting. And amazingly, most of the states in the United States also follow and cite this German Constitutional Court's ruling and abide by it. Right. So this is a Constitutional Court's ruling that defines elections at most places worldwide, and in India we don't. Right. And I agree that to declare that a paper-based voting is correct or it is understandable by public, that statement is also not true, right? So if you do a completely paper-based, old-fashioned ballot style voting, there are a lot of administrative processes which are defined by the Election Commission, and a general public may not have any understanding of that either, right? That process is also fairly complex and correctness is difficult. So this Constitutional Court's ruling is not, it's not that it is not controversial or not that it cannot be questioned, but it stands as the major ruling today, right? And pretty much use of cryptography in electronic voting has been ruled out because of this ruling, this particular ruling. Computer scientists are more or less backed off a little bit. So what to do then? Then you need VVPATs, voter verified paper audit trail. I think the German Constitutional Court pretty much said that votes must be recorded in another way. And I think that Rebecca Mercury, the same person who proved that an EVM cannot be proved correct, in her same PhD thesis recommended, and actually she made very strong statement. She said it's impossible to conduct elections without voter verified paper audit trail. So she laid down the properties of what a VVPAT system should be like, and recommended in 1992 that all elections should be conducted, all electronic elections should be conducted with accompanying VVPAT systems. So it is now commonly understood that there is definitely a need to move away from certifying voting machine as hack-free or hackable and so on and so forth. So these are irrelevant questions, to establishing that the outcome is correct. Do whatever, use an EVM, don't use an EVM, but establish that your outcome is correct. And to gain public trust in large election, the only democracy principle is that the public should believe that your election is correct. And this constant talk about elections being hacked, this, that, or the other, it does not do any good to democracy. So one has to design elections assuming that voting machines can be hacked. Right? That's the conventional understanding. So when a computer scientist designs an election system, he does not depend on trustworthiness of an electronic voting machine. I think that would be called incorrect computer science. But that seems to be the Election Commission of India's approach, and we are recommending that we should move away from this. So if you cannot trust an electronic voting machine and yet do electronic voting, how do you ensure that the outcome is correct? There are actually only two ways of doing this, right? One is you have end-to-end verifiable cryptographically secure voting system. I won't cover it today, but in the next talk, as an illustration, I'll try to cover what such a system may look like, right? Just as an illustration. This, however, because of the ruling of the German Supreme Court, is a no-no, right? You cannot allow computer scientists to run election, right? People like me to run election. We are proven incompetent. So, right? So, yeah. So that would be undemocratic. The other option that you have is post-election risk limiting auditing using VVPAT. So that is what is commonly followed all over the world. And there, the de facto standard is this classical paper by Philip Stark and Wagner that came out in IEEE Security and Privacy called Evidence-Based Elections, where they showed how to do this. And this is such a great paper. And Philip Stark, I got him to depose to our commission, sort of coaxed him to depose to our commission. But actually, it was not necessary because this published paper clearly outlined how to do this audit. And I'll talk about this a little bit more. So there are these two methods. There can be ways to couple them also. But the conventional wisdom, the accepted wisdom, both in computer science and in election authorities, is that the second is a preferred option, is a more preferred option, that you do risk limiting audit with VVPATs. So let us examine that a little bit. So what are the essential requirements? There are two major desiderata, if I may say, right? The first one is that election system should be software independent. This was pointed out by Rivest in 2008. And Rivest notion of software independence is that if there is an undetected change in a hardware or software, for example, due to hacking or by any mistake, right? If a hardware device or the election software functions in a way it is not supposed to, that should not ever cause an undetectable change in the election. So which is to say that there should be an audit procedure that should be able to catch it. If that is not the case, that election protocol is incorrect. I mean, this was Ron Rivest's definition. That suppose you are using an election hardware, and if the election hardware has gone wrong and done something wrong, it should be always possible to detect that, right? Whether you detect that using audit or not is immaterial, but there should be the possibility should exist. That there should always be possible to detect that. And the second desiderata is dispute resolution. So suppose a voter raises a dispute that my vote was not recorded correctly, right? So I voted for BJP and it recorded Congress, for example. There has to be a clear determination either in favor of the voter or in favor of the election authority, right? It should be clearly determined that who is lying, which of the two has made a mistake. The second one for a direct record electronic voting system is, as we have discussed, is impossible, right? If it happens in the privacy of a polling booth, and if I have pressed 2 and the machine says that you have pressed 3, then it is impossible to determine who is correct. So the process has to be fair to the voter. You cannot possibly be fair to the machine, right? So you have to design a system that has to be fair to the voter. So ultimately, there are just these two requirements of a voting system. It has to be software independent, and there has to be a clear protocol for dispute resolution. Anytime a dispute happens, right? The Indian election system, unfortunately, despite its success, fails on both these counts. It is neither software independent nor is it fair to the voter. And these are not minor points, and as I'll illustrate as I move on. So, so VVPAT, what are the requirements? They are required in law by in most jurisdictions to make the polling process understandable to the common man. In India, they were brought into law because of a public interest litigation filed by Subramaniam Swamy, which was accepted by the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court directed the Election Commission of India to conduct all future elections with VVPATs. So it's a law in India. It has got into the Representation of the People's Act, but in a slightly vague way, and I'll say why. So the major problem with the Indian voting system is there's no clear definition of which is the vote. Is this the electronic thingy that you record inside an EVM that is the vote? Or is it the VVPAT slip that comes out that is the vote? Right? And the two are not in one-to-one correspondence, because the electronic vote just increments a counter for BJP or Congress or political party A, political party B. So when you cast a vote, some count goes up by one, right? For some candidate. So there is no vote explicitly. It's just a count. Some number 37 becomes 38. And a VVPAT slip, it falls into a sack from a printer, gets detached from a printer and falls into a sack. And it is impossible to know which one was your vote, right? So it all gets mixed up inside a sack and become indistinguishable. So the Indian election system and the Representation of People's Act have not clearly defined which of the two is a vote. This is important because suppose there's a mismatch between the two, as there almost always is. So if you manually count the VVPAT, it's extremely unlikely that it will match the electronic one exactly. And which one should be counted? Which of the two should be counted? In a nutshell. So this question came up in the Bihar Assembly elections very, very strongly. Many of the candidates protest. There were a huge number of complaints to the ECI, also to the Supreme Court. But this has not been satisfactorily resolved. The Representation of the People's Act does not answer the question at all. The Election Commission of India behaves as if the electronic vote is the correct one, whereas common sense demands that it should be the VVPAT that should be the correct definition of a vote. And most people I have talked to, or most people that deposed to the commission, thought that the VVPAT should be the correct definition of a vote. Now, also a voter should have a full agency to cancel a vote if not satisfied. For example, if I have voted for BJP and the VVPAT slip shows Congress, right? What should I do? So in India, the way the system has been designed is that I cannot touch the VVPAT slip. I can only see it through a glass window for 7 seconds, and then it falls into a sack, gets detached and falls into a sack. So this 7-second visibility, is that enough? Now, if it shows that I made a mistake or it has recorded it wrong, what am I supposed to do? I cannot stop it. So this is not really a voter verified system. So my only option at that stage, if I don't agree with what has been done, is to raise a dispute. And that will require me to go out, stop the election process, stop the next voter from entering the booth, and tell the polling officer, look, it recorded my vote wrong. And the polling officer, there is a penalty of 5,000 rupees for frivolous complaint. Now, how am I going to prove that I'm innocent? What I'm speaking is the truth, because the VVPAT slip is no longer there. It is fallen there. So what the polling officer does in India is that he comes and does a mock poll, one mock test. And if that is correct, he declares that the voter has lied. And depending on the situation, either fines or not fines the voter. And as a result, there's been almost zero cases of voter complaint. Though many voters have come out and said that, that guy recorded my vote wrong, but an official voter complaint is unheard of in India. And this is a completely incorrect design. So in our report, we recommended that this should be changed promptly. And so the Rebecca Mercury, the way she defined VVPAT is that The voter should have full agency to cancel her vote if she thinks that it is wrong. And this process of cancelling should be simple and should not require her to interact with anybody, any polling officer. She should be able to cancel and recast anytime she wants. The only real way to do it is that this VVPAT slip must come in the voter's hand and the voter must drop it in the box with her own agency. Only then it's a proper voting system. So the Commission's recommendation was that redesign the VVPAT system in India to make it truly voter verified, properly define which is the vote, and amend the Representation of People's Act, which makes VVPAT mandatory for voting. Okay, so now the VVPAT may be trustworthy during voting, right? So while the voting happens, suppose they're trustworthy. Suppose they design a system where the VVPAT slip comes in the voter's hand and the voter inspects it and then puts it in a box, right? Well, the question is that do they remain trustworthy during audit? Like in Bengal elections, happened in 7 phases over a month, right? So in this 1 month, the VVPAT slip was in some strong room somewhere, was transported in some suitcases, some buses somewhere. And the question is, are they trustworthy? How do you ensure that they're trustworthy? So this is a process which in computer science we call compliance audit. And again, Stark and Wagner says that, what are the kind of properties that can be defined for this administrative process? And how do you ensure that this administrative process is completely trustworthy? I think that what we follow in India, not only in India, in most countries, is some kind of an ad hoc process whose properties are not clearly enunciated, right? So this process is, the custody chain. It can never be foolproof, but it can be made as near foolproof as possible by following certain processes. And these processes are well defined in this classical paper, but almost never followed. And we also recommend that this be followed um, by the Indian system. Then comes the final question: that how many EVM should be audited, right? So how many EVM, so the EVMs, the electronic counting can happen. You just shove in the EVMs into a port and the electronic counts come out. Each EVM holds about 2,000 votes, 1,200 votes. 2,000 is the maximum capacity. So you can count in a few hours just by the electronic count. And a few of these EVMs should be cross-checked by full manual counting. The question is how many? That is the VVPAT audit. That is called the risk limiting VVPAT audit. And this process is very well understood. And there are also these issues of, suppose they don't match. Suppose the EVM count and the VVPAT count don't match. What do you do? Do you declare the entire election for the entire population null and void and announce a re-election? Or do you hand count the paper slips for the entire population and discard the electronic votes? So this process is again not defined very clearly in the Representation of the People's Act. It's ambiguous as it can get, right? So in fact, the answer to these two questions are completely undefined, amazingly, and that makes it extremely unsound, right? So what is the audit process, and what should be done if there's a mismatch? And this is related to which is the correct vote, right? And the total number of complaints are both to Election Commission of India and Supreme Court are incredibly high. There are about 23 cases on this issue pending in the Supreme Court of India, which is not heard for a very, very long time. And our commission found that completely amazing. So what is the Cephalology technique that you should use? There is this statistical probability distribution called the hypergeometric distribution, right? So this is, I'm quoting straight from Stark's paper, this paper of risk limiting audit, Stark and Wagner. This describes the probability of finding k defective items in n rows without replacement So the binomial distribution is with replacement. And the only difference between the binomial and the hypergeometric distribution is with replacement and without replacement. So you have a population size of capital N, and you assume that there are exactly k defective objects. So in this case, k hacked EVMs, capital K hacked EVMs. So the rate of hacked EVM, suppose, is known, and I'll tell you from where that figure will come. Suppose you know that there are k hacked EVMs, then what is your probability of finding small k hacked EVMs with small n draws? That's what the hypergeometric distribution is. It's second year statistics. It is taught to second year undergraduate students, but looks like not to Supreme Court of India, not to Election Commission of India. Right. So amazingly, the Stark and Wagner paper was completely correctly interpreted and reported by an IS officer called Ashok Varadan Shetty, and he wrote an op-ed article in the Hindu business line in 2018, and saying how to do the VVPAT audit. He didn't depose to our commission, but we took suo motu cognizance of his op-ed, and he was completely correct. He used the hypergeometric distribution, and he showed that if you assume that you have 1% faulty EVMs, hacked EVMs, then to detect at least one faulty EVM with 99% probability, you need to sample so many EVMs depending on the population size. Okay. So if you take the country as a single population, the entire country as one population. So India deploys about 10 lakh EVMs all over the country for 543 constituencies, a little more than 10 lakh EVMs. You only need to sample 459 EVMs, right? If 1% of EVMs are faulty, and to detect at least one with a probability of 99, you only need to sample 459 EVMs. But if you take a parliamentary constituency in India can be of a size ranging from here to there. UP will be somewhere out here, UP and Bihar, the large states will be somewhere out here. A moderately sized state like, say, Telangana will be somewhere out here. So we have this range for a parliamentary constituency. For an assembly constituency, we have about this range, right? So as you can see that the number of EVMs that you need to sample, they taper off, right? So for us, so percentage wise, if you're doing for an assembly constituency, you may have to sample more 50% of EVMs. But if you're looking at a country on the whole, you need to sample as a very small set of EVMs. So the question is that what is the correct definition of the population? So this question came to the Supreme Court of India, and the Supreme Court of India asked the ECI to file an affidavit to show that what is the correct thing. So the Election Commission of India said 1 per assembly constituency is enough. That was their affidavit. That if they do 1 per assembly constituency, 1 EVM per assembly constituency, that should be enough. Right? They filed that in an affidavit in the Supreme Court. And as supporting evidence, they filed an affidavit by 2 professors from Indian Statistical Institute, very, very well-known statisticians, Professor Abhay Bhatt and Professor Rajiv Karandikar, 2 of the most eminent statisticians from the country. And they said that 1 is sufficient. 1 per assembly constituency is sufficient. You know, the Supreme Court, you know, despite their lack of facility with statistics, found something fishy. They refused to write down an order, but they verbally said, no, 1 sounds too small, do 5. And that is the current practice, that you do 5. And this case is pending in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has not given a decision on the matter. And Election Commission of India does audit of 5 EVMs per assembly constituency to declare the election correct. Now, this is problematic for the following reason that, you know, so where did Abhay Bhatt, the 2 statisticians, come from? They took this figure. They said 478 are sufficient. So clearly they used the hypergeometric distribution. They took the actual number of EVMs deployed, which is a little more than 10 lakh. and did the hypergeometric distribution and came up with the number 478. Now that assumes that you have to have a homogeneous hacking strategy for the whole country. Now the whole country doesn't even have the same political opponents, right? So to assume that there's an entire homogeneous, the population is the entire country, and your hacking strategy in Kerala is same as hacking strategy in West Bengal is extraordinarily naive, right? So this was completely amazing, and that's the size of our population size. An assembly constituency deploys 30 to 300 EVM, a parliamentary constituency deploys so many EVMs, a state deploys from 150,000 to typically 10,000 EVMs, and India as a whole is slightly like more than 10 lakh EVMs. So what is the consequence of SC's prescription? Actually, it's not Supreme Court's prescription. It's actually Election Commission of India's prescription, which they managed to get the Supreme Court to sort of agree to, right? Though the Supreme Court thinks that something is fishy because they never passed an order. So suppose, so cross-checking 5 per assembly constituency or approximately 38 per parliamentary constituency, if there are 25% EVMs that are wrong, that are hacked, right? You will catch it with a virtual certainty. But if there is only 1% of the EVM that are hacked, your probability of catching it is only 0.33. Right? So with a probability and with an overwhelming probability of 0.67, you will miss the fact that EVM has been hacked. Right? So this sampling is incorrect. If my second year student gave this sampling strategy, I would have given that the student a 0 in the exam, but it stands. So the other thing is that, of course, the margins are important. You cannot come up with a number of how many EVMs to audit independent of the margin. So common sense tells you that if the margin is a single vote, right? If party A has defeated party B by a single vote, then the audit will require manual counting of everything. Without manually counting everything, you can't say. But if the margin is 10 lakh votes, then you need to audit only a few things, right? If the margin is overwhelmingly large, that party A has defeated party B by 10 lakh votes, then counting a small number of votes is correct. And the hypergeometric distribution tells you that. So if the margin is 10%, then for a detection with probability 0.98 of that 10% swing has been manipulated by EVM hacking, you need to cross-check only 3 EVMs in an assembly constituency. On the other hand, if the margin is 1% or 0.8%, is a closely fought election, then you need to sample many more EVMs and count them. So this is so the EVM audit process, the risk limiting audit process, has to be much more principled and not ad hoc. And the number of complaints that are pending before the ECI and the Supreme Court regarding how many VVPAT slips to count are mind-bogglingly large, and over the last 5 or 10 years. And I think this is not healthy for a democracy. I'll just take 5 more minutes and stop with this question, the theme that Shankar Sen has given me. That can blockchain provide verifiability? Right? That's a question. So blockchain, typically blockchains come with internet voting. So as I have already discussed, that internet voting is an impossibility right now because you cannot give a secure device to every person, and you cannot ensure that the person is not coerced at the time of voting, right? So blockchain can be used. So what's a blockchain? A blockchain is a ledger, is a sequential block of ledgers where data gets into a block, a series of blocks, and there are peers. So there are multiple participants in a blockchain. So every peer has a partial copy of the entire blockchain. So if I and Smari and Zainab, we are peers in a blockchain, so typically all 3 of us will have copies of the entire ledger, our own copies of the entire ledger. So to say that it is a distributed database is wrong. It is 3 centralized databases with the 3 peers, right? So each one of us has the complete access to the entire data. So the distributed aspect is only in the control. So what gets onto the blockchain is determined by a consensus algorithm. So we 3 have to execute a very complex protocol. Everybody must have heard about the Byzantine consensus protocol or something similar, to decide that what gets added onto the ledger. If all 3 of us agree and elect a leader, and the leader gets to decide that what gets added onto the ledger. So, we cannot put stuff arbitrarily onto the ledger. And then the second component of a blockchain are time-stamped hash chains. So the hash is an electronic signature. So you keep computing the electronic signatures of what has got onto the blockchain in terms of hashes, and this gives the blockchain a traceability and an unalterability. And non-repeatability. So changing what has gone into the blockchain is almost impossible. It's believed to be almost impossible, right? Because it's publicly visible. It's a publicly visible ledger. So if I have to tamper this blockchain, I have to recompute the hash chain, of everything that has gone out there, and generate a fake proof trail, which is impossible to do unless I have infinite computing resources. So that gives the blockchain an untamperability. So what is ECI's proposal? The ECI's proposal is grapevine, right? There is no official record of an ECI's proposal. I have had some personal communication with ECI's proposal. They wanted me to design an election system for them, but I didn't like what I said, so that conversation fell through. But there are these, I have linked it here, so I won't do it now. But there are these articles, public articles, in Indian Express and so on and so forth, that seem to say that what is the ECI's, what does ECI have in mind? And I must say that I have never seen greater confusion than what is reported in those articles. And people saying that why blockchain should be used for design. Those are completely amazing and hilarious reads. So from the looks of it, they are thinking of polling booth protocol, not internet protocol, but uploading encrypted EVM data onto blockchain so that they become publicly visible. They're encrypted and publicly visible. And probably they do homomorphic tiling, which means that they do the vote addition in the encrypted domain itself. And there is some big talk on putting the electoral rolls on blockchains. So if you read our commission's report on electoral rolls, the electoral rolls in India are dubious. There are huge problems of exclusion, and there are huge problems of disenfranchisement, especially of vulnerable communities. Tribals, marginal communities like LGBTQ. There are so these are documented problems of electoral rolls, and they seem to think that putting them on blockchain, those problems will go away. No, this without getting into too much detail, a blockchain derives its security from distributed control of multiple mutually adversarial entities. So it is highly insecure when there's only one authority. There is only Election Authority of India that is running a blockchain that gives zero security, none whatsoever. So they already get to decide what has happened in the EVM. What is the point in putting it up on a blockchain, right? So where is the mutual adversarial protocol on what should go on a blockchain? That has already been decided by the EVM. So so unless you ask each political party to be an adversarial peer in a blockchain, I don't see how a blockchain can help an election at all of this type. And it is not clear that what aspect of the verifiability problem does it solve and how. Right? It does not really solve the EVM dispute resolution problem. It does not really solve the software independence problem. So which part of the problem does it exactly solve? That is not clearly articulated. And it is unsuitable for verifiability of electoral rolls exactly for the same reason. That, the electoral roll problem defined on defining ground level processes by the electoral registration officers to ensure they don't miss out somebody. So yes, you need transparency in the process. You need public accountability, but that cannot come from a data structure that requires multiple adversarial authorities for its correctness, right? So where is that coming from is unclear. So what they may require is a cryptographically secure public bulletin board. That may address the electoral roll problem somewhat and also voting problem. So I plan to touch upon it a little bit next Saturday when I get into cryptography a little bit. So I will get into a cryptographic protocol, not to advocate that it be used in election, but just as an illustration of what verifiability means. What kind of verifiability may be achieved if you allow maths to get into election. So I'll stop here. I'll just summarize. So the question of whether an EVM is hackable or not is not a meaningful question at all. It cannot even be effectively answered unless it gets hacked. If it gets hacked, it is hacked. Otherwise, you cannot comment on it. You definitely cannot challenge people to hack it. That is neither here nor there. Configuration changes like one-time programmability, VVPAT, control unit, these things are immaterial. They don't make a voting system verifiable at all. You cannot say that it is verifiable because I've got a strong certification and a testing protocol. That's fallacious argument. Right? Testing can never determine whether a machine has been hacked or not. There are bigger problems with the VVPAT system, right? The VVPAT system, as I said, is not voter verified. It doesn't give the user the agency to cancel the vote. And that is something which is sort of a low hanging fruit and should be corrected straight away. In the US system, everywhere it was a paper ballot that the voter herself took to a scanning machine or put it in a box, right? That's how the system was used, and that's obviously the correct way to do it. EVM audit by cross-checking with manual VVPAT should not be based on ad hoc strategies. And if Supreme Court cannot do proper statistics, they should be told so in no uncertain term to register for statistics courses, statistics 101. Maybe some statistics professors also need that. But there should be rely on only on well-established professors and risk limiting audits. And there are established literature on how to do all this, right? There are great election papers coming from computer science and statistics that tell you how to do it, and they should become de facto standard. Blockchain, the design, if blockchain has to be used in election at all, it should not be a closed door design. How the first requirement is make the design public, let the public comment on it, let hundreds of people pick holes in what you are trying to do, articulate clearly what are the objectives, what problem in the election conundrum does it exactly address, why would it make the electoral rolls more secure, and apparently on the surface of it, it does not really seem to address anything at all. So I'll stop there, and there are questions. I'll try to answer.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Bannerjee, for a really interesting talk. I agree with all of your points. It's interesting just how much of the complexity of voting gets glossed over very easily by people who purport to be experts, and I think you attacked a number of those quite succinctly, so that was quite good. And I have a number of questions, but I think we should probably start by trying to take questions from the audience if we can. So if anybody who's watching and wants to...
Should I stop sharing the screen?
Yeah, I think that might be better for making it a more of a dialogue.
Right.
Yeah, so if anybody has any questions or comments or anything like that, then feel free to let us know, raise your hand, or put them in the chat, and we'll try to get through as many as possible. But well, I haven't seen any questions yet. Oh, actually,
No, there's
here
a
we go.
raised hand. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. So Rudraksh.
Hi, Professor Banerjee. So I had the privilege of reading your paper, and somewhere in the paper you speak about how if it's an electronic voting machine with a pure electronic process, when a person casts their vote, they're given a commitment. Now, to me, the commitment sounded a lot like a unique identifier of some kind.
Oh, that's a cryptographic protocol, right?
Right.
Oh, that's a paper I wrote. Don't take my paper seriously. That's only for getting a good publication in a computer science journal. But what I'll do, Rudraksh, is that maybe I'll take this question on next Saturday after I discuss a cryptographic protocol.
Done.
Right?
Absolutely. Thank you.
That was great. There's a question from Anand in the chat. I think unless Anand wants to say it himself, I can just read it out. So, or it's more of a comment, I guess. Blockchain solutions, even if they have any point, are only trying to help avoid tampering after the vote is recorded. There's no mechanism to protect from the risk of malfunction of EVM. Isn't that going to give a false sense of security?
I would think so. Yes, I would say that so you get in a blockchain, the distributed consensus decides what gets onto a blockchain. But if the EVM has already decided that, EVM has decided that there are so many votes for party A and so many votes for party B and so many votes for party C from this polling booth, where is the question of not letting that data go onto the blockchain, right? And if you put up that data on a blockchain, then why a blockchain? Where is the distributed consensus here? So the whole process or the concept is a little hazy, and it's not at all clear that what happens. So when people design electronic voting system on based of blockchain, they typically assume internet voting. There are lots of paper in computer science where they assume internet voting and on the basis of blockchain. And I think that such systems have been tried in Estonia and Switzerland and a few other countries. But as I said, internet voting is very, very a theoretical concept. Nobody knows how to do it correctly. They are just fraught with dangers. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I liked when you said that they believe that if you put it on a blockchain, the problems will go away. It tends to be the narrative about all things blockchain these days. It's a data structure. It's a really slow database, and yet it's being treated like a magic wand. But I think in computer sciences, in many fields, if you have a hammer, then every problem starts looking like a nail. But it would be good if people were more specific about what exactly they mean when they promise various guarantees. But there's a question from Pritam. So have there been attempts to have the same electronic EVM-based setup for allowing voters to vote at any booth in India, probably with prior registration? If yes, what changes are required in the current setup?
Oh, I think that India has been using EVM since 2004. So you have an offline authentication. So you go with what is called a voter's ID card, and somebody verifies your photograph and your name on the electoral roll. And then you go inside and cast a vote. Till about 2014, the system was a purely electronic system. Okay, so it was just a machine with a button, and you pressed a vote and believed that the machine has recorded it correctly. As I said, there was this public interest litigation by Subramanian Swamy, BJP MP, and they changed that. They changed that then to have a VVPAT system. And yes, so you go into India, every vote is electronic, right? So with a paper audit trail.
Yeah.
No. He is asking the migrant question.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
right. So the migrant question, no, the migrant question is a big problem. So so I think that there was a question in on its talk last Saturday in Hasgeek, where a past election commissioner, my friend Qureshi, he 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 answered this question by saying that they should be allowed to vote where they are right now, right? So if they have migrated, if it's a migrant laborer who has come from Bihar to Delhi and is working in Delhi, then he should vote in Delhi. I think that's too simplistic. That does not sound right to me. I would say that for a person who goes back and forth between Bihar and Delhi, works in Delhi, but his family is in Bihar and he goes to Bihar in some seasons, should be able to choose where he wants to vote from, either Bihar or Delhi, right? And the state should facilitate it. The Election Commission of India should facilitate it. And so this, in my opinion, will require multi-race voting systems. So for example, if you set up a migrant voting polling booth in, say, Delhi somewhere, in the India International Center in Delhi, then that polling booth needs to support 542 constituencies, right? Starting from Jharkhand to Bihar and so on and so forth. So this will call multiple races, and the number of races will be fairly large. So how to design such a system correctly? There are two stages to it. One will be designing a correct registration system to record that the voter will vote from this constituency and not from this constituency. And the second is the polling process by itself, right? Both, in my opinion, are not that difficult to solve. It just requires a will to solve. And anyway, I think not solving it is a blasphemy for democracy. I think 200 million people not getting to vote is it makes our election process wrong. So I think that this is something that needs to be addressed immediate. And it's possible to address. Maybe in my next talk, I'll try to capture some thoughts on how this may be addressed.
Yeah. I have a lot of questions about this because what you're saying kind of comes down to issues of what is citizenship? How is it defined? How do you prove it? How do you in Iceland, for instance, we have a very so we know the name and identity of every citizen. And you don't have to specially register to vote. And this is easy here, but in countries with land borders for one, but also just more complex histories and layouts, these questions become a lot more difficult. But I would say, in this day and age, if you cannot just go wherever you want and vote, regardless of your geography, and have the problem of which polities you are a member of be solved in the process, then that seems a little bit underdeveloped. That's just a quick comment there.
That is putting it mildly.
Yeah, I know, and it's not an easy thing to solve, but it does seem like if you pinpoint the topic too much towards migrants rather than saying, why don't we just solve this in general for everybody? It's
no. So to add to that comment, that is a question that is facing our country tremendously. We have Aadhaar, but that is not citizenship. That is residentship. So that doesn't define citizenship at all. The government came up with a proposal to define NRC, National Registry for Citizens, and there were huge fears of exclusion, and there were fears that it is a political move to exclude some people, and there may be some truth in it, right? So the amount of fear and amount of suspicion about that process was, about the legitimacy of that process was completely incredible. And we also have a voter database system, an electoral roll system, which is the voter ID system. Now, why the voter ID system is not the citizen register system is completely unclear to me. How are they different? And and the parliament and the electorate don't seem to find this odd that we have a voter register system which is different from the citizen register system, and these questions need to be answered. So I think that and there is this fear about government taking away data. There is disenfranchisement. There is so what is the correct way to do this identity problem is an open question in India, and I think that it's much more complex than in Iceland, obviously, and hence the chaos.
Yeah, absolutely. But I must admit, every time I follow an election in the US or in various countries in Europe or even in India, I do wonder like why these two databases are not just one database. It would simplify everything and probably be less prone to abuse. In fact, if I can just put in a question, and we have a comment also from Biaka. So because you were talking about provability and verifiability, provability in any voting system really comes down to verifiability on one hand, but unlinkability on the other. Meaning you want to sever any link between the voter and the vote that is cast. But verifiability requires being able to prove not only that a vote was cast, but also that it was registered correctly, as you talked about in your talk, but also that it was correctly tallied and that it had the correct effect on what Kenneth Arrow called the social welfare function of the election. But being able to do that implies being able to link a particular vote to a particular voter, thereby proving that the vote was cast correctly, which breaches the unlinkability concept. So you have this kind of conflict there. And so in paper voting, we achieve unlinkability by ballots being dropped in collection ballots into a collection of ballots by the voter, thereby severing the link. But paper elections are not formally verifiable. We simply achieve Byzantine verifiability by having enough people with enough different objectives and interests involved in the process, keeping checks on each other. So, and then audit procedures and such. But with electronic voting, unlinkability is much harder to attain. And as you say in your talk, verifiability is still difficult. So it's like we lost the good feature that we had, and we also didn't gain the other feature. So, and this comes down to identity, and we've got an endless number of people like criticizing the AdHad system and all of these other methods of trying to figure out who's even allowed to participate. But so my question is, how are you going to bridge this gap? And in particular, like, wouldn't the blockchain type solution specifically eliminate any possibility of unlinkability? I know that's a complex question, but
no. I think that's an incredibly correct question, and it's a question at the heart of computer science research over the last 30 years on electronic voting. This is the primary question. That what Smarty is saying, that to give any kind of a proof to your voter that I have recorded and counted your vote correctly, I have to ultimately know how you voted. And there is a possibility that the very fact that I'm able to give this proof mathematically, it presupposes that I know who you voted for, and hence your vote is no longer secret, right? So there is and that violates every principle of voting. So computer science uses not necessarily blockchain, but tries to use cryptography to solve this problem. And it uses most of the systems use a technique called zero knowledge proofs, which is a part of blockchains also. That so you give a proof of knowledge without. So you say that you say that I know how to factor number n, but I won't tell you what the factors are. So you give a proof that you know what are the factors of a number n and prime factors of a number n as p by into q, but you don't show what is p and q. That's a zero knowledge proof, right? So you use typically zero knowledge proofs to give this verifiability, but and you make certain assumptions. So there are certain secrets that has to be held by somebody, and that's where the problem lies. And you distribute the secrets over multiple trustees, typically in computer science. So you cannot solve this problem without a regulator. Say if Election Commission of India holds all the secrets, then this problem is unsolvable. But there has to be a regulator. The Election Commission of India has to be under a regulatory oversight. And the two parties, the regulator and Election Commission of India, they can jointly give you a proof. And you have to assume that they're adversarial. They won't collude to do the election. So under certain assumptions, you can achieve both verifiability and unlinkability. But whether you can achieve public trust, that's the question, right? Whether a public can trust such a system. So that's what I'm saying, that a public will have to trust such a computer scientist. So a computer scientist will have to declare an election to be safe. And whether that is valid in a democracy, actually most computer scientists think no. That is elitism at its worst. So I think that is the primary reason that computer scientists have not advocated use of cryptography in elections. But my personal feeling is that if not today, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years is inevitable. When the general understanding of computer science and cryptography goes up a little, the techniques are too sophisticated to not to be used. So what I thought I'll do is that as an illustration, I'll discuss one such technique. I'll address that how to have both unlinkability and verifiability using a cryptographic protocol. And that's something I'll address in the next talk.
Very exciting.
Also electoral rules. Yeah.
Yeah. We have these comments from Biaka, and also just to say again to everybody who's watching on the call, or if you're watching on YouTube, just leave comments and or questions and or raise your hand if you're on the call, and we still have a little bit of time for a few more questions. But Biaka says, thinking about the 5,000 rupee penalty for frivolous complaint. Earlier in the talk, you referenced the presence of the danda.
Lathi.
Yeah, Lathi stick, the electoral booth.
Yeah, so yeah, of course it is there. I think it is reduced in India, the coercion. But growing up in Bengal through the tumultuous time of 1970s, I went to school in 1970s, and I saw elections from 1970-71 when thousands of people were killed. Elections in Bengal are fought with swords, and so they're incredible. Their entire communities are told to vote in certain way, otherwise they'll be beaten up. That was a threat. So if you travel to rural India, northern India, Bengal, Bihar, UP, coercion is the name of the game. Coercion, bribery, giving money to the entire community to vote in a certain way. It happened, and there were complaints in the Bihar elections and the last Bengal elections as well. So these are tremendous social problems in a democracy such as ours. So the danda is always there. It may have reduced a little bit, but I seriously doubt that whether it has gone away or whether it would go away so easily. Whether I have changed an e-voting protocol in my academic work? See, in an academic work, your objective is to get a paper published somehow, right? So we are a bunch of phonies, and so academic world at many times is a little divorced from the real world. So the academic work, you make certain assumptions sometimes which is untenable. It is untenable, but you just try to demonstrate a technique many times, and hence so every time you publish a paper on electronic voting, you don't advocate that method be used in public, right? So it's a little bit divorced from real life. But the commission, whether it got complained about the Danda, yes, it did. There are these fierce journalists called Poonam Agarwal who deposed to the committee. And the role of money power, the role of violence in election, and so on and so forth. There were several depositions, not related to the EVM theme, but the other themes. And some of those depositions are quite shocking. So the depositions are public, so you can go and read them. And it's an education. It was an education for me, at least. I think that some of my other fellow commissioners were more worldly wise. They have been the chief election commissioner and chief information commissioners and Supreme Court judges. So they were probably more used to the worldly ways. But for me, it was a shocking eye opener.
So one thing you mentioned that I think you're going to talk about this more in the next session, but you mentioned one of the proposals is homomorphic encryption, and it's one of those wonderful holy grails of cryptography that people have been looking for and hoping for years, and it never really comes to fruition in the way that people want, and in particular because it's very hard to defend against known plain text attacks and unknown ciphertext attacks in that kind of encryption mode. Do you know of any research that suggests that this might actually be viable right now?
There is a most elegant paper by Ron Rivest and Ben Adida, his PhD student. Adida and Rivest is called Scratch and Vote. It's an incredibly elegant paper which suggests homomorphic voting, homomorphic tallying, homomorphic encryption and tallying. And the paper is almost flawless, but they end the paper saying, don't use it. In the conclusion, it says that maybe the time is not ripe for such a method to be used. So this is a paper from 2009, 2010. You cannot fault the paper in terms of its elegance, like much of Ron Rivers' work. This is also, maybe a little complex to implement, perhaps, but probably if you're not familiar with cryptography, complex to understand. And I think that's good enough reason not to use it. Yeah.
So we have another question here from Biaka. So more of a general question on the role of the experts in the public sphere. Deeply appreciates Professor Bannerjee's skeptical approach. What would be your suggestion to cultivate a wider presence of self-effacing disposition among self-aggrandizing experts? That's a bit of a pointy question, but I think it's actually really valid, and it says especially expert technocrats and tech moguls. There are plenty of those. Chiming in.
I know where this question is coming from, and I think that it is coming from a deep skepticism in which technical deployments have happened in India over the last 10, 15 years, and I sympathize with the views expressed completely because of the following reason that India has seen deployment of digital technology in public life like no other country has seen. From a somewhat technologically backward country, we have leapfrogged a little bit recklessly into digital technology. So we are the only country that has a digital identity authentication system for 1.2 billion people. We deployed Aadhaar. We have been doing electronic voting from 2004. No other country has done it. No other country that I know. Definitely not at this scale, but no other country has even ventured into electronic voting like this. Our Prime Minister announced a national health ID system and digital health record, electronic health record system for everybody in the last Independence Day. England have failed to do it 6 times. They tried it 6 times, and 6 times they were abandoned their databases. They have deleted their health record databases because of privacy concerns. Sweden has tried it and they have leaked data. The entire data has become public last time in 2019. I think they leaked once in 2018 and leaked once in 2019. United States of America hasn't even tried it. They're too scared of such a thing. They have local small scale electronic health record, but a nationwide electronic health record is unheard of. And our systems have got deployed by a process of what may be called crony expertism. So you handpick some experts from my institutions, IITs. You pick a professor like me, and somebody like me, we get onto a committee and we sign off a system of a mind-boggling complexity. This clearly, I agree that is a wrong way to do things. I think that when it comes to this kind of system, there are no experts. The designs should be open to public consultation and public scrutiny. But even before the design, the objective should be articulated clearly. That what is it that you want to achieve with the blockchain? What is the objective? First, agree on the objective, and then I have always believed that be reckless in ideation, but be super conservative in deployment. You publish a paper, you have to be completely reckless. Whatever idea comes to your mind, publish a junk paper and forget about it, right? And maybe get a promotion. But if it comes to deployment, bringing it to public life, public consultation is the only way. Make the design public and let expert, non-expert, everybody comment on it for 1 year before you move on it. That's the only way to go. And there are no experts when it comes to a system like designing an electronic voting system for the country of this size. It should not even be done by experts. It's ultimately public trust that matters. That's the only thing that should count.
Yeah, that's
a personal view.
Yeah, no, and I think you're absolutely right. It ultimately comes down to trusting the systems. Here in Iceland, we have most of these health records and everything available through public APIs, online systems, and we have a common identity system. So you don't need a separate health ID and a separate voter ID. You just have an ID. It's a simple way, but that's worth a discussion of its own, because there are certainly other problems. But I think we're running out of time, so I think at some point, I suppose if you have any final comments and thoughts.
I think Kiran has a question for you.
Yeah, so I would have to get my phone. It isn't here, so maybe. We apparently have a bit more time. So actually, you say some clever words, and I'm going to see if I can find my phone.
No, but I can. If there are more questions, just unmute and ask. I'm happy to discuss, listen to your comments, or whatever from anybody.
Professor Subhashis, thank you for the wonderful talk. So I have a question. So from what I could gather from your talk, I think verifiability is a very important aspect of ensuring credibility of elections.
Yes.
One of the low-hanging fruits is how effectively we can use VVPAT. Is what I
absolutely.
What are the 3 tangible steps that you can think of which we can readily implement so that we can increase the verifiability and thereby credibility of it?
The first thing is that make the VVPAT system voter verified. So, which is to say that the voter must have an agency to approve what has been printed on the VVPAT slip. You just don't show it, flash it for 7 seconds, and it drops into a box. That's not voter verified. So give a mechanism to the voter to cancel if the voter is not satisfied, right? And actually, the best would be for the voter to get the slip in her own hand and drop it somewhere. So that is So make the thing voter verified. That's the first thing that needs to be done. The second thing that needs to be done is ensure that the voter verified paper trails are secure between the election and the time of counting, right? So there are standard processes outlined by election experts, like Stark and Wagner paper tells you how to do it. These are semi-cryptographic processes, like putting seals in a certain way, putting parity checks to ensure that no voter verified slips have been injected or deleted from the system, right? So putting just a seal and polling agents to sign it is too simplistic. So right now what they do is that they put a seal, a paper seal on it, and polling agent of everybody puts a signature on it. Now those things are easily hackable, fairly easily tamperable, and there must be a better compliance audit process to ensure that the custody chain is trustworthy. From the time the election happened to the time the VVPAT slips are counted, the integrity is maintained. The third thing is that count a representative sample, statistically representative sample of VVPAT slips manually. In India, they declare the results first and then count the VVPAT slips of 5 assembly constituencies. Now, once you have declared the results and one party has started celebrating, there is no way you're going to change anything, right? There'll be riots if you try to change that election. So I think that that's a completely wrong process. I think that there is no hurry to declare the election. Do the VVPAT audit of a necessary number of EVMs. Take your time. And only once the audit is, the risk limiting audit is passed satisfactorily, do announce the election. So and I think that in the short, the low hanging fruit, just these 3 steps will make the election process much more credible.
Also, another addition to it, will auditing at the moment, I mean, for every assembly constituency, there are 5 VVPAT. And
5 EVMs.
So can linking the margins to number of VVPATs that have to be audited, will that be a good idea?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the evidence-based election papers of Stark and Wagner tells you exactly how to do it. And amazingly, this paper by Ashok Varadhan Reddy on Hindu Frontline, you can Google it and find it. And he outlines it, and as an advice to Election Commission of India in 2018, he advises Election Commission of India on how to do it, margin-based counting, margin-based audit. And that process is simple and so correct. And I'm amazed that once somebody has pointed it out, once the Election Commission of India has been pointed out by an IS officer, a serving IS officer, that this is the correct way to do it, why would such a recommendation be ignored? And why would you try to fight it in the Supreme Court? I think that this is not the right way to do things. Yeah, I think somebody has posted it out there. Yeah, that is a paper by Ashok Varadhan Shetty, and that tells you how to do VVPAT audit completely correctly.
Yeah, thanks for that. So Kiran asked me to demonstrate the Icelandic authentication system. I showed him this last time I saw him in Germany. So I wonder if the glitter has worn off a little bit. But so just to explain, here in Iceland we have on the one hand an identity number. So each individual has an identity number. It is for identification, it is not for authentication, right? So my identity number, I can tell you, is 0702842789. Knowing that will not help you impersonate me in any way, but it will. It is a semi-public number that is used to identify me uniquely in any database, right? But on the other hand, we have authentication mechanisms. There are a couple that are competing. The one that's kind of won out is privately owned at the moment, but there's the government has been moving to purchase it because it feels like the most common authentication infrastructure should be government owned. But using it, so the way it works, there's a cryptographic, essentially a private key that's on my SIM card, and it can be used. So it's bound to my identity, and I can go to virtually any website, my bank, my pension fund, various health services, you name it, or a variety of other things that just happen to use the same authentication system and log in. So I won't show you my bank account or my health records, but I'll pick something relatively innocuous. There's a database of all Icelandic people that's public, and so I don't know if you'll see this, but I can just click the login button. And it offers me to put in my phone number. So I just put that in. It's pretty short. And so that after doing that, I just click login, and I get a message through the SIM card system, right? So, or through the phone system, asking whether I want to open this website. And then I put in a PIN, which unlocks the credentials. And having done that, I send a response, and boom, I'm logged in, right? So this I did without any password. I didn't have to create an account or anything like that. I just give it my, I just tell the website my phone number, and the authentication system is handled through the phone system. And I just essentially allow my SIM card to sign a cryptographic challenge. That's it. This is, I think, a fairly sensible and wonderful way of doing things. And really, I don't understand why not everybody does this. So, yeah.
So I just want to clarify on this. In case people didn't get it, this was not an SMS. It was not an OTP login. This was software running on the SIM card embedded in the phone. It's not software on the phone. It's not an app. You can't replace it. It's hard-coded into the SIM card. And this is technology that every SIM card already has, including the SIM cards that we use in India. So essentially what's happened is this was a cryptographic exchange that happened on the SIM card, which essentially recorded consent to proceed with the login. Yeah? And it's cryptographically verified. It is not OTP based. It cannot be fake.
Right, exactly. And so there's a question about how digital the system is if you have to update or change details like address. There's really only one entity that needs to know my address, and that's the National Registry. Well, the post office, I suppose. And so it is entirely unrelated to my personal identity. Where I live. So this is something, I lived in England for a while, and it was amazing how difficult it was to authenticate myself, because there was always this assumption that where I lived was part of my identity. But, you know, I move around a lot. Why would that be part of my identity? So
that's a perennial confusion in India, you know, that why can't you have, my son's biggest complaint is that why can't he have two addresses? He lives in Hyderabad and lives in Delhi, and
right.
he is not allowed to have two addresses, right? So, yeah.
And this is one of the ways in which migrants and people who live maybe non-sedentary lives are being disenfranchised. So eliminating that notion of your address being part of your identity and authentication is, I think, pretty important. So just on the other hand, the downside is that this system means that my phone number is part of my identity. But, you know, okay, we have to accept something, I guess.
That's like Aadhaar. That's 10-digit versus 12-digit.
Yeah, exactly. But Aadhaar does this thing that I quite dislike, which is it conflates identity and authentication.
And fingerprints. Identity.
Yeah. So that would be the authentication step, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Okay. So are there any other questions? Anybody want to join in?
There was Paul's question on the digital aspect. I don't know if that was addressed. Like, how digital is the system if you have to update or change details like address?
Yeah, you can do all of that pretty much digitally, like online. But I guess my point there was that address and such are not part of the identity. But yeah, we have government online services for a growing number of things. So in practice, you should be able to buy a house and complete the transaction without going to any offices or anything like that. Just do it all online through this this authentication system and then the web services that are provided.
And there's a question from Anand, raised hand.
Can I ask?
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah. So one thing that I want to kind of bring out is like where technologists talking about what technology can actually bring to the election process. But so one thing that actually worries me is we're generally talking about improving trust in the election process, right? Should we start talking about bringing more transparent existing process? For example, I don't know if we have transparency about how the EVM has been manufactured and then have an audit trail of how those things are actually coming and they're managed. So wouldn't that be something that we should actually be more worried about to begin with?
You know, my reaction to that is that, of course, they should be transparent. And that, you know, any public system whose design is not transparent is a blasphemy. So, you know, of course, it should be transparent. But, you know, suppose they make it transparent. It still does not get you public trust. You know, what will they do? They'll put up a design on a GitHub and they'll put up a source code on a GitHub and they'll say that this is the way we design the EVM system. No. From there to proving that that source code is what is running on every EVM is an impossibility, right? So unless you have bring in some extraordinary cryptography to like proof carrying codes and so on and so forth, rather complex stuff out there. So while that is an essential step for public trust, that is necessary, I don't think that is sufficient for public trust. So making things transparent is something that should happen routinely. But public trust in an election cannot come from an opaque hardware or a software. So ultimately, the dependence has to go away from that somewhere. So you know, I like so Ron Rivest. If you read his papers, he has been writing for the longest time on elections. He thinks that election equipment should be based on public, you know, publicly available commodity electronic devices, like maybe this phone, right? Is the hardest to hack. You got to get it from Apple. It is manufactured for one purpose. Just put some software out here, like Smarty and Kiran talked about right now. You know, put some cryptographic protocol, and your election hardware should not be anything more than that, or the or the Mac laptop or a Dell laptop that you can buy. You know, just commandeer this laptop from school. And you don't know, every laptop is different. They're not manufactured for the election. So they are most difficult to hack. And use public commodity hardware for running elections. That's the way you will get trust the most, right? So ultimately, the requirement from the hardware should be minimized to the extent possible. And I think that you don't require anything more than smartphones ultimately to run elections. Smartphones as EVMs, not people don't have to carry smartphones. So, and if one smartphone goes back, just replace it with another smartphone, right? So I think that the EVM ultimately has to be very simple, and the proof of correctness should be independent of the hardware, like using VVPAT slips or using cryptography or what have you. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, so there are, I don't know, there's, I guess, one more question from Biaka. So it would be good to know from Smari on what kind of technology debates or contestation he has with his parliamentary colleagues. That would be a long conversation. I mean, one of the things that is happening in pretty much every country in the world right now is technology is rushing in very, very quickly, causing all sorts of madness. And countries are variably quick to pick up and adapt to this new world, right? And so we have these problems like, India's done electronic electronic based voting for a long time. Estonia has done it via even online, but most countries are, I think, naturally and sensibly going very slowly on this. And of course, the pace at which different countries go is always going to be a matter of public debate. In Iceland, we have moved fast in a lot of ways. We have a small population. I mean, it's, we're less than 4 lakh people. It is very easy to change the nature of Icelandic society very, very quickly. But at the same time, we tend not to rush into things that fundamentally change the nature of our society very quickly. So it's a nice balancing act between liking the new tech and being very in favor of new tech, but also being somewhat conservative. And a lot of the debates I have in Parliament on technology mostly comes down to this thing exists, it is new, it is maybe somewhat scary, but it's coming whether we want it or not. And the question is, how quickly do we regulate it? How quickly do we adopt it into some kind of legal practice? And what kind of limitations do we put in force? So, for instance, there was a change to the money laundering law a couple of years ago, which basically expanded it to include cryptocurrency-based money laundering. The argument that I made at the time was the definition that was being used was overly broad and also unspecific in ways that might limit the use of blockchain technology for non-cryptocurrency or non-monetary purposes, such as maybe voting. Honestly, I criticize cryptocurrencies a lot, but if we're going to regulate them, we need to do it very slowly and very deliberately and make sure we don't make mistakes. So as a technologist who happens to be in Parliament for a spell, I end up trying to explain technology to people, and it sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but it's always a big mess. I don't know if that answers the question, though. But there's a question here about whether I own my phone number in Iceland, and how does ownership around the phone number across different countries manifest as a correlate to identity. So honestly, I don't know. I suppose the numbering scheme is just a public resource, and it gets allocated to me for the duration of my tenancy. But
so the question is that suppose you stop using a cell phone and you say you want to have nothing to do with it, can that number go to somebody else after 10 years? Then
absolutely.
Yeah, that is a problematic thing, So
why?
Because you will leave your digital footprint somewhere, and that
yes,
may be confused, right? So yeah. So I think
absolutely. Yeah. I just honestly haven't thought very specifically about this, so I don't know how different phone companies do this here. But I guess, are there any other questions? I also have lost track of time a little bit.
Yeah, I think that we have 5 minutes to close, so there are no
Okay. Yeah. So last chance, if anybody wants to come in with a question. If not, I can ask you maybe one more, and just about, because you mentioned statistical testing, whether you have any opinions about using real-time or time-lagged statistical sampling as a way of ensuring verifiability. So essentially, as the vote is being conducted, people are taking statistical, like essentially something like a jackknife or bootstrap type sampling of the paper data and comparing it to the stored data.
So in India, there are logistic issues with that. So to do something like that, you need the internet, perhaps. And I think that in many polling booths, there is no internet. There's no possibility of an internet in India. We conduct elections in pretty remote areas. The other difficulty with that is that our elections are over a long period of time. So you cannot really announce results or do any auditing till all the phases of the elections are over. So to hold the elections results, such a large country, so Bengal election, for example, happened in 7 phases over a month, and you are not allowed to do any auditing in between. So I think there's a logistic reason. So statistical auditing online is a possibility. Otherwise, theoretically, there's nothing to stop it. But fundamentally, there are logistic reasons to stop it. My only concern with statistical audit is that do it correctly. So don't come up with ad hoc means to declare an election. Statistical audit is the cornerstone of an election, whether it is paper based or whether it is electronic, and that step cannot be sidestepped or cannot be you cannot use uncertain methods for that step. So
no, exactly. So I suppose with that, do you have any final thoughts or comments?
No, I think so I can tell you my plan. What I was thinking on the next talk is I will try to do individual verifiability and try to bring in cryptography only as an illustration to show the possibilities, not as an advocacy for any particular system. And I'll spend some time on integrity of electoral rolls. I think that question has bothered me quite a bit from my engagement with the Citizens Commission of Election, and I think that that is the weakest point in the Indian election system. It's not the EVM system, but it's the electoral rolls. And I'll just try to give some thoughts on how possibly technology can aid that process by making that process more transparent and accountable. So I'll spend some time on it in the next talk. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to seeing that. And just thank you very much for doing this, taking the time today. So, and thank you to everybody who listened in. I'm going to just hand back to Sankarshan. I think he has some final comments or thoughts, but yes, thank you again.
Thank you everybody.
Oh, we would just like to thank both of you for the absolute wonderful conversation. We did start off with something that was very technical and then started examining far more deeper aspects of this subject, as it always happens. And then we reach points where interesting conversations come about. So we look forward to the next session, which is next Saturday. Updates will be sent to those who subscribe to the project and on our Twitter feed. And the summary of this session will be created and posted as well. Although I must confess, given the technical nature of it, the summary will take some time being created to do full justice to it. So please be patient.
I'll mail you slides and you can put those slides up.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you so much. And with that, yes, we will see you next week. Thank you for spending your time this Saturday, wherever you are with us. I'm sure you had better things to do, but you chose this one. We are much obliged. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Oh, and Zainab reminds me, call for evidence speech. Yes. So this project actually includes call for evidence. It's based around that, which allows us to create a way to examine the upsides and downsides of introducing new technology into electoral democracy and electoral processes. And so if you are participating in this session and you have something to contribute to that, please look up our project page and submit evidence that provides the comments on that. That's all I had to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.